Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Art Side of Life, where it's all about how you can turn your creative passion into a profession. My name is Eva, and my guest today is highly accomplished and awarded children's book author, illustrator, and character designer from Pennsylvania. As an illustrator and writer, he published almost 40 books, among which are critically acclaimed titles like Now and Ben, Neo Leo, and Timeless Thomas. He has written and animated several films for Sesame Street and designed characters for Jim Henson Company. He always tries to make learning enjoyable and entertaining for kids, and his works often focus on inspiring figures. So please welcome Gene Barretta. So welcome to the next episode of Art Side of Life, and I'm super happy with my guest today, amazing, talented Gene Barretta. So please welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to talk with you.
Super happy that you took a time from your busy schedule, and I would like to start maybe with your background and if you always knew that you wanted to be an artist.
Well, my mom told me that when I was 3 years old, I drew a big purple elephant on the wall next to my crib. So
Okay.
I know I was drawing from the beginning. And I did, one of my earliest aspirations was to be an animator for Walt Disney. You know, before I was even 10, I wanted to do that. And at one point I wanted to work with Jim Henson and make Muppets and things like that. And I actually have a letter he wrote me when I was 14 giving me instructions, which was pretty cool. And my brother has gone on to work with the Jim Henson Company, and he's one of the Muppet performers. Yeah. And then I took a side turn, which is not a dramatic side turn, but then I went to school for filmmaking. And I've continued to draw, but then I wanted to be a film director and studied film, went to NYU Film School, University of Bridgeport Film School. And eventually, because of all sorts of reasons, we can talk about it later, I ended up exploring the publishing world and found out that it could be a career, because it wasn't until I was in my late 30s that I had ever considered it as a career. I just didn't think it never occurred to me, and it seems like the ideal job for me now. And it seems so odd that it would never come to mind before that.
That's very cool. So which were like kind of the biggest decisions you had to do in order to follow your passion?
Let's see. The biggest decision, I was living out in LA and I was working in the film industry, and I left there for a number of reasons. And I was pretty lost for a while, just trying to figure out what was next. So that move was a big deal. I had also tried playing in a band at one point in my late 20s, early 30s. Yeah. And I realized, I love playing music, but the lifestyle is important too. And I don't like the idea of being on the road all the time and playing in, smoky nightclubs and things for the rest of my life. So the lifestyle was a big decision and factor there. Plus, it's just a really difficult business. So those were some big decisions where I just had to say, all right, I put a lot into this, but it's time to jump off this track and try another one. And so once I started, when I moved back to this area outside of Philadelphia, I started meeting friends who were making careers as illustrators, because I started as an illustrator before I was an author. And I saw what they did, and they worked as mentors for me. And and then I made the conscious decision to start putting portfolio pieces together and sending them out to publishers and giving that my best shot.
Yeah, and so before you moved, or kind of like after you moved, basically, did you have a job or you just moved and then it's like, okay, I will go for it?
Yeah, I stayed, when I moved back east, I stayed with my parents for a while until I figured it out. I even then moved down to Virginia for a while and lived near my stepsister, and I worked with at a video company, production house that did all industrial videos and stuff. It was kind of biding time. I was working a little bit. I did some animation for Sesame Street at the time, which was all freelance, and I was able to work from Virginia. And I worked with a show called Between the Lions, which is also was on PBS, and some of the same people were involved. But those jobs, they weren't career focused. I didn't really think, I knew that they were freelance and temporary jobs. Did I answer your question? I think I got off track a little bit, didn't I?
No, I think
But
it's good.
yeah, well, I was what, did I have a job? No, not a steady job.
And do you remember like the first conversation when you talk either with your parents or your partner at the time, where kind of you decided, okay, I will go for this full time and I will make a career out of this?
Well, I think my mom was just happy to see that I was going to do something that involved the arts, because she knew that since I was, like I said, since I was 3, that she was always a good motivator. She wanted me to pursue those passions and dreams, and so she had no problem with it. She said, "Oh, good, he's found something. He's found a track to follow." Um, and then I got married around that time, and we made a conscious effort, because my wife was working and I was bringing in some money, doing some school visits and things like that, but we made a conscious effort for me to just spend a little time putting the portfolio together while she was supporting us for the most part. And we made a strategy, and it panned out, because then as I was doing when I was picking up little illustration jobs here and there, I was then able to offer them watercolor work and things that were better suited for picture books. And then I kept making more and more connections based on the work that I did in that concentrated period. So there was a strong concentrated effort to go full blast into it.
Yeah, and so what would be like a best advice you ever received?
Best advice I ever received. In a general sense, I always think back to my uncle, my grandmother's brother, who once said at the dinner table, "When you go through this life, make a wide path. Let them know you've been here." And that's always stuck in my brain. Specific to the career, it's I don't remember getting this advice from any specific person, but it's keep your tentacles out in all directions. Don't get your heart set on one path, because it's such a competitive field that it's likely that path, at least at the start, may not show itself to you. And so I started as an illustrator, and the strategy was to get my name in front of all the publishers first as an illustrator. So when I was ready to start handing in manuscripts, I wouldn't be just some anonymous name in a pile of manuscripts.
Okay.
And I got my agent, who I still work with, in 2003, and that was part of our strategy too. And now it worked, because I built relationships that way through the jobs I was already doing, and then just expanded on it and say, "Hey, I write too. Do you want to see something?" And it went from there. So it's just, don't limit yourself and don't box yourself in thinking, I have to be, for example, I have to be an illustrator who just does this style of work, or just does this type books on just this type of subject, or I won't take illustration jobs that are, that I consider below, my talent range and things like that. Because it's all part of learning how to work in the field as a professional too. Sometimes the jobs aren't nearly as important as spending that time building those professional relationships and learning how to be diplomatic and how to collaborate in a positive way, things like that.
Yeah, and when you decided you want to have a agent, or kind of, how did you find the agent? Did you have a mentor who kind of advised you to do this, or someone who inspired you?
No, not really. I wasn't looking for an agent at all. It's a lot tougher to, it was a little easier to get your work seen without one when I started, and so I wasn't looking seriously for one. But then I belonged to this organization, which I recommend to anybody starting. It's called the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. And there's a website, scbwi.org. It's an international organization, and I belonged to it when I was starting. I've done some, I presented at some of their conferences, and they're international. You can always find local conferences in your area. And you learn all about the trade, and you meet editors and art directors. And one year they were holding a conference in New York at the Society of Illustrators. And they were planning to have about 30 agents there, and you could pay to sit down with as many agents as you wanted.
Okay.
So my wife then and I said, it's worth it. So let's invest. I paid to sit down with, I think, 5 agents that day. And didn't hear anything right away, but then about 2 months later, one of the agents gave me a call, and that's the agent I've been working with now, Laurie Nowicki. Painted Words is the organization. And we've had a great relationship and continue to.
Ah, that's really good. Yeah, because you need to kind of find this good dynamic between your agent and you, so you understand each other, and yeah.
Right.
So that's quite important.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, we know each other well enough where she knows what's happening in my personal life and I do hers, and that helps too, because she gets a sense of the rhythm of how I'm working at home and what other things fall into my life at the time, and it all helps.
Yeah, and when you think about like all your artwork, because you created so much already, is there a brand in mind or a vision you are communicating through all of your artworks and stories?
A brand? Well, it's funny because people see my style easier than I do. They say, yeah, you definitely have a style. And I don't necessarily see it. I kind of do what I know how to do. And even when I'll have conversations with my agent about that, and she'll say, try a little something like this or whatever. And it's not always easy for me to see, because I just kind of, maybe because I wasn't formally trained, that I don't know what to compare it to easily. I mean, in the broader sense, I can compare it to styles. But I think my approach, though, which is consistent, is I've worked in I've made a lot of nonfiction books, and one of the things that I've enjoyed is to find a way to teach. A lot of mine are also historically based, and I've always looked for a way to get this core information across to kids in an enjoyable, fun, entertaining way. And since my illustration style is more on the lighthearted side, I think that's been a good balance, because sometimes the material can be a little more on the serious side, but it's more accessible to these young elementary school readers if the illustrations have that lighthearted touch. And I can always even if the subjects themselves aren't doing something humorous or lighthearted, the background can be filled with something that makes you smile, or at least, gives you that spirit.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely helps for young kids, and they are just more excited about the topic. So that's amazing.
Yeah, you're right. And I think at this age level, for me, it feels like the books I'm doing, even though there's lots of information, and adults learn from them too, it feels like it's still an introduction for kids. And if I can get them excited about Thomas Edison or Ben Franklin or Leonardo da Vinci in that fun experience, they're more likely to then go pick up another book on those subjects and continue that interest.
Yeah. And so do you have a favorite project you worked on?
That I've worked on? Favorite project? Well, it's hard. Kids will ask me what my favorite book is, and I always say, it's like having to pick your favorite child, right? Because they all have something that is important to you, because most of the time I'm the one developing these treatments to present to the publishers. So it's my idea to begin with. And I'm always learning a lot more about these subjects as I go. And so that's a big part of my passion for it, is to keep learning about the things that I'm interested in. So if I had to choose one, I would just say, maybe my first book as a writer and illustrator, which was Now and Then, The Modern Inventions of Benjamin Franklin, because that was the first one that I did as a writer, and I lived near Philadelphia, and it was great to research him in this area, because there were lots of local historians. I could walk in where he walked. I lived in the city itself during the 80s, and that's part of the thing that inspired me, because people were always saying, hey, Ben Franklin invented that. Hey, he helped develop that. And so it made that city more alive for me. And then it did really well. It's still one of my best-selling books, and so it really helped to launch my career.
Yeah.
So it still remains one of my favorite experiences as a writer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because also with the memories you had around, so I think that's super cool experience.
Yeah.
And let's talk about some upcoming projects. Do you have something which do you want to share, and it's super exciting right now?
Well, my next book that comes out is in next February 2018, and it's called The Bat Can Bat, a book of true homonyms. And I've done a book on homophones and homographs, and we're rounding off the trilogy with homonyms, and that's fun. Those grammar books have always been, I guess I could say, more fun in a different way, because the other nonfiction books required a lot more research, and it was a lot harder to get all that information boiled down into picture book size and making it something that you could share with kids that age. With these grammar books, I basically went online, found a list of homonyms, for example, and then the challenge was to find a way to put a little narrative thread to it and find a theme that made it fun. And so it was fun in that sense, where it was just a lot of silly, fun playfulness a lot of times, and the word plays were always fun to create.
Yeah.
So that's coming up. And then I don't want to say, I don't want to say anything about the ones I'm developing now, because two of them, I'm sure other authors and illustrators have this experience where they come up with an idea and they say to themselves, if anybody else does this before I do it, I'm going to jump off a ledge, because it's just that strong a desire to get it out there, and not, and if I saw somebody else did it, it'd be a big disappointment. So I don't want to say anything about those yet.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But, yeah.
But there are two other books in making, so people can look forward to something new as well afterwards.
Well, yeah, there's another one that's also in the making that I can talk about. My last book that came out was called Muhammad Ali, A Champion is Born. And it was fun because it was the first book I did just as an author, which was the first time. And the illustrator was Frank Morrison, who I admired. And it was interesting because I always wondered, and sometimes felt sorry for authors who had this vision and then had to hand over their manuscript, and then it could become anything else, something completely different than how they envisioned it, depending on the illustrator. It could be a better experience, sometimes it could be worse. So I was nervous about that, but I liked Frank's work, so I was confident that it would turn out well, which it did. And we're doing a second book on George Washington Carver, and I'm writing it, and he's illustrating. Here comes one of my cats. Get back. Step back.
I don't see her here.
No, I know. She'll show up eventually. There's two of them here. What? She'll show up. I don't want her to step on this stuff, though. Go away.
So now when you're writing the books, you don't probably have time to illustrate it as well? That's why you choose different illustrators? Or what is the process, thinking behind this?
Well, I don't generally make that decision. This was a matter of, because I would always like to illustrate them, unless, there are cases where I would see how my style might not fit the tone of the book, and I would be happy to have another illustrator in a case like that. But the illustrator and I share an agent, and initially they came to me with the idea, because he wanted to do a book on George Washington Carver, and she teamed us up. And we worked on that first, but then when we got this 2-book deal, they wanted to do Muhammad Ali first. And so we just put Carver aside, and we started there. And now we're getting back to Carver.
Ah, okay.
So I didn't consciously say I'm going to just write something for another illustrator. But I like the idea of continuing that, because it just broadens the kind of work I can do.
Yeah, and
I will still illustrate for other authors, and then I'll do some that are both and write for other illustrators.
So they usually kind of also suggest for you who would be a good fit, like author and illustrator, or you kind of choose yourself, or?
No, I don't choose myself. Only in a case like that, we were able to present the idea as a team. but it wasn't guaranteed they were going to accept us as a team.
Okay.
It's always and here's advice I could give to any aspiring authors or illustrators out there. Many who have not done it yet think that if they're submitting something like a manuscript, that it needs to be illustrated first to submit it. But the opposite is true. Editors and art directors do not want to see an edited manuscript unless you're already a working professional and they know your work. Then of course you're presenting more of what you do. But they want to be the ones they'll have a vision of how they want to see the manuscript illustrated and put you together with that, with an illustrator who works.
Okay, that makes sense, yeah. And so now when you have so many different projects and you have to decide sometimes to say no to things, what is your self-talk, when you have to decide yes and no? And include your cat in the project as well.
Yeah. Well, I always consult my cat.
So
the project.
cute.
This is Clover. Wait a minute, I lost my headset. This is Clover. Say hi.
Hi, Clover.
Yeah, Leo's around here somewhere. You can't stay here right now. I'm being interviewed. Unless you have something to say. No.
I love the pattern on the face.
That's one of the reasons I picked her, because she likes to do Phantom of the Opera for me. And when I'm bored, she just puts the mask on and sings a little bit for me.
That would be fun. I would love to see that animation.
Yeah, I should, I should actually just videotape her. I could manipulate the mouth and just put the soundtrack on from Phantom of the Opera.
That's true.
Yeah. So the other one I'm sure will show up at some point.
When it will be interviewed again.
Yeah.
So what we were talking about, I forgot.
We're talking about the collaboration in the author and versus illustrator.
And yes, and then deciding yes and no when you had to kind of choose the project, maybe. What is the self-talk?
You mean just aside from it being author or illustrator, just jobs that I'm going to choose to do?
Yes, yeah. Basically, how do you decide what to do with your time? Because it's only limited, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's part of the art of doing this is the art of juggling, because I'm very organized, fortunately, and if I can't turn the camera, but I have, if you look on my website, you'll see my boards, my dry erase boards that have everything up there, and so you're always juggling things and planning ahead. You're thinking, okay, I'm going to send the manuscript in. And when, while I'm waiting to hear back from them with notes, I can start sketches for this other book that I have. And while that's being approved, I can develop some new ideas, because I'm always trying to, have something that my agent is shopping around while I'm working on the books that are already contracted. There was only one time really where I ran into a little problem and we worked it out. I was illustrating a book for Joy Behar, who's in America. She's on a show called The View. And I did 2 of her children's books. But the second one, we ran into scheduling problems because I was about to start my Neo-Leo book, the one on the ageless ideas of Leonardo da Vinci. And so what I had to do, which I don't necessarily want to repeat, but it was, it still turned out fine. But I was able to do for her book all of the layouts and sketches and character designs and things. And then we had somebody else do the coloring and the painting. And then they sent it back to me a few weeks before it was due, and I did any extra touch-ups and things that I thought I needed to do. And he got credit, of course, with that on the book. But it's not something I would want to repeat, but it was a scheduling conflict. And so we worked it out that way.
Yeah, and so what did you kind of learn from some of these experiences? Or maybe what was the most difficult moment of your career? Or maybe what would be your takeaway?
Difficult moment of my career? I don't know if there's an isolated one. There's, like any freelancer, there's always the challenge of creating more contracts and keeping the cash flow going, because I don't have a second job. This is everything that I do. And it's not just the book work. Occasionally I'll do some character design work or some other illustration work. It's the challenge of it's the challenge of generating more work, and then getting things sent back to you that are rejected and need to be revised. And there were a couple of frustrations when I was doing there. There are illustration jobs I'll do, say, for books that'll go straight into schools, educational books, school publishing books, and there are occasionally jobs where there are too many cooks in the kitchen, and you get back lots of notes, and some of them contradict each other, and it becomes a matter of, that's a real lesson in, diplomacy, and how do I sort this out without coming off as like some temperamental artist who refuses to collaborate, or there have been a couple cases like that where you have no idea what they want from you, and so you just keep hoping that what you send back in will work, and you usually find the answer. But those are the big frustrations. The biggest nightmare and the embarrassment of any career I've had was when I was working, like I mentioned, back in Virginia at this video production house, and sometimes we would videotape surgery.
Okay.
And for the University of Virginia Hospital. Yeah, I know. It's actually, I was a little nervous, but it was pretty fascinating too. I was right in there looking at the insides of bodies, and but once we had to take video of a procedure where they gave new infants IV needles. But at that age, they put it in a vein in their head. I know, right? And so I had to put the camera up overhead to do this. And they said, okay, we're going to do this, right? So I reached up, turned the camera on. They did the procedure, and I went to turn it off, and wait a minute, and I realized my finger never turned it on. So it's not something you can repeat, right? So it was just, I just, all the blood drained out of my face, and I had to tell them I didn't get it,
Yeah.
So we had to come back, another day to do it. But that stands out as my biggest embarrassing moment in.
So check the. Okay, we are we are recording.
Yeah, you better. You better be recording.
Just to check,
because now I'm about to give myself an intravenous needle in the forehead.
No, I think I would faint. I would be just on the floor for sure. Because it's fascinating, but for me, if I see something, then I'm all blue and I'm on the floor. So.
Yeah, I was known for that growing up. My brother would always get hurt, and I would be the one to faint because of seeing a little bit of blood or something. But I got better with that, especially watching surgery.
Oh yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's good. Congrats on that. I cannot do that.
Yeah, thank you.
And so when we are talking about these different projects as well and kind of learning moments, how do you keep yourself motivated?
Motivated. It's not always it's kind of you have to. I have no choice, and when you become a parent and all of that, when you can't. I have artists who have friends where they have the luxury of creating art for themselves and gallery work and things, which is great, and sometimes they just wait for the inspiration to hit them and then go to work. Yeah. But this is different. So if I'm not motivated, it doesn't matter. I just have to do it. It's like what was that quote? Was it an Thomas Edison quote? It was 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration, because you'll get there.
Yeah.
And you just have to keep working it, and you'll get there, and you'll get something that you like. But if I'm just blocked, I might decide to change my work location. If I'm writing, I don't always stay here. I'll go out and sit in a coffee shop or a library and look for things that talk to people, get my energy back up, do something to move. I have to just change my location, or I'll go online and watch a video of something that moves me or inspires me, makes me laugh, just to change the mood.
Yeah. And
you have to do something like that.
And just to mention for the audience, you are in the studio, right? And your studio is in your house.
Yeah, so I spend a lot of my time alone, aside from the cats,
They're
you
just
know.
running around now.
Yeah, I thought I heard the other one come up, but did I? No.
No, I was like, I don't, no, I
Let's
don't
see.
see. No.
No cats.
No,
No,
no.
no. It's like a Where's Waldo thing, you know.
I was like, I don't see them
Do you
there.
know Where's Waldo?
Sorry, once again?
Do you have Where's Waldo over there? Do you know that
Yeah, I
expression?
know it. Yes, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But then
Okay.
he needs to have the shirt, no?
Yeah, the red striped
Yeah,
shirt.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it was actually translated to every language. The
Okay.
book, yeah, at least I saw it on the airport, so that's actually
Okay.
quite
Yeah, yeah.
good achievement. Like you can get it anywhere.
It would be nice to have a book like that. I've had my books translated, um, not in your language, but in Chinese and a little in Spanish and Braille, which was really cool.
Wow.
Surprise. Let me see. I'll show you an example of that. They don't. So where is it? Yeah, here we go. You can't. They don't reprint the whole book, but what they'll do is they put an overlay of Braille. Let me see if I tilt it. Can
Oh
you
yeah, yeah,
see?
you can see it a bit. Oh wow,
Okay, yeah, it's got the Braille over the page.
that's
And
amazing.
on the, where is it? On the cover here, right here. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So a few of
Wow.
them have been put into Braille. The National Braille Association or something like.
Yeah.
Sorry, I forget the official name.
Yeah, because I haven't seen the book like with the braille writing yet, or maybe I just haven't picked it up, so I didn't notice because I wasn't searching in that section maybe of the bookstore or so. But
Right.
yeah, so it's usually like you have one book which is created, and then it can be translated to different languages or braille.
Yeah, or some go digital. Some show up in anthologies. Which was a cool thing because I also part of my income are royalty checks, and so you have nothing to do, no more work to do, but it ends up in an anthology, more royalty checks. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Other languages, I'm looking. Sometimes they're made into small little board books. Looking at the different, sometimes, and of course paperback. Sometimes after a while, after they've sold well as hardbacks, so they show up in all sorts of
Yeah.
uh, formats.
So how many books did you have so far? Like you worked on and you created? Do you remember the
You can
number?
kind of see. Let me see my fingers.
Yeah.
Can you see these little
Yeah.
frames? It's a little, it goes back into that dormer
Because it's
window,
cut
but
off, yeah.
it's my little gallery. Like once I finish a book, I put the cover in a little frame and put it in there. But as an illustrator, I've illustrated about 30 or so books. Some are, like I mentioned, some of those school publishing books that go right into schools. Some are regular picture books and things. As a as a writer, and illustrator, I've done eight or nine, and one of which isn't out yet. And then as a writer, I'm working on my second as just a writer.
Yeah, wow, super cool. And you also had so many awards. I mean, amazing.
Well, thank you.
And so, is there something you wish you knew before you started?
I don't know. I've always kind of, and not intentionally, but I've always been somebody who just kind of jumps in. If I have some confidence in what I can do in a certain field or area, I'll jump in and end up learning a lot as I'm doing it. I'll know enough, of course, to get hired and to do what I think is everything I need to. I'll have a sense that I'll be able to handle it. But there are always things that come up, whether it's technical stuff or not, that you learn as you go. And same with the publishing world. I had no clue that where my books might show up, or even festivals or awards or things that they could qualify for. The different formats I mentioned, all that stuff can only really happen, or you can only really learn that stuff when you're already involved in doing it. And sometimes I find myself in a place where I'm clueless, and I'll fortunately have friends I can call to, like one of my first illustration jobs was for a tiny little board book. I don't have these at the ready, but I have all my books on a shelf here, but a little board book called Bugs, and it had little bug toys in it.
Oh, cool.
And they wanted it to be colored digitally. And I had never really worked digitally before, so I said, yeah, of course I can work digitally, and called my friend up as soon as I got off the phone and said, get over here. You have to teach me how to do this, right? And at that time, I was just, using a mouse to work. So, but now I have a Cintiq tablet, which allows you to draw right on the screen and things like that. And I've incorporated that into my work. Not for final pieces. I've done a few that have been, digital pieces that have been requested, but I can do a lot of the work, layouts, and some sketching on that. And then I have a large size printer here, and I can print the work right onto watercolor paper, and that's how I finish it.
Oh, that's really
over
cool.
on that table over there.
It's
My
far
pointing
away.
direction. Yeah, it's on the other side of the room there. It's like, let me see if I can. It's right over on the other side of the room there, and you can see where my paints are and things like that. No.
So the creature was cool?
What's that?
There was a creature in the camera.
There was a what?
The toy? Or I haven't noticed what was it, but you had some toy in the camera.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yeah.
Oh.
That was cool.
Okay, if you say so.
Nah.
All right.
And so for the printer, do you have the favorite brand or any?
Well, I've always used Epson. I don't know the other models well enough to compare and contrast, but I've always used the Epson ones.
So what is the biggest size you can print with that one?
I can put in, sorry to keep switching, but you can load in the back. Usually the watercolor paper I load is, I usually will paint on sheets that come as 24 wide, and I think they go 18 high, but I cut them down so they fit into that at about 13 inches. And if I fit in a 13 by 24 piece of paper.
Okay.
Which is pretty good size. It was a career saver, because before that and before the Cintiq, I would have to, and I did a few books this way, where I would work everything in Photoshop, print it out in segments on a regular size printer. Then I would tape it all together, put it on a light table, which is over there, and then trace it all onto the watercolor paper. Sometimes really detailed images. And if I messed up the painting, well, then the whole thing has to be retraced, and I could spend hours wasted doing that. And you don't, and when you're tracing, you're losing some of the life that the original has. It doesn't quite ever match up. So this has been a blessing to just as a time saver and as a way to get a more accurate sketch in front of me before I paint.
And do you have some other tools or mediums you would like to recommend to young artists?
I always just use the two I mentioned. I generally finish my work in watercolor, and work digitally occasionally for a lot of the early part of the process.
And for watercolors, do you have a favorite brand? Maybe people should try at least one or something.
I always use Winsor & Newton.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm not one, like I said, I'm not formally trained, so I never experimented too much with it. I just, I have friends who, I asked friends, what do you use? What do you like?
Yeah.
And I kind of started with whatever they recommended, and I just kind of stuck with it. It is a frustrating thing about my career, but knock wood, it's because I stay busy. But I'm always saying, okay, when I finish this, I'm going to spend a couple weeks just painting, just experimenting, so that my craft can maybe evolve or, but I rarely find that time, which is frustrating because I would like to spend more time painting. One of my favorite parts of the week now, and I've been doing it for the last 10 weeks or so, is I have a group of friends who have a Wednesday night sketch group, and we sketch a live model, and I get to do life model work and it's very different from what I do here. And so that's at least a way of experimenting and expanding, and I can bring lessons from that back to what I do here.
Yeah, and also some networking as well, and kind of.
Yeah, not so much there because we're all doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So it's just friends. Actually, this week I'm the model. We take turns.
Cool.
We either have friends who come in to model, and we all have to pay our dues by sitting in the chair. Not naked, by the way.
Okay, when you say so.
Clothed modeling. I've never gone that far with it. But who knows if they.
Maybe you can do some cosplay, some wigs and scarves or whatever.
I could just sit my cat in my lap and cover all the parts that.
I don't know if the cat would say sit still.
Might be dangerous.
yeah, exactly. It's like, okay, I'm done with this, and then the kid will want to run away.
He might get scared and damage me for life.
So, okay, maybe don't do that.
Yeah. Ignore that.
And when, we were talking about, friends and books and stuff, so do you have, a favorite book maybe you give as a gift to friends or family?
Books of mine that are favorite?
Or just, in general, the books you would recommend, everyone should read.
I don't know. That's always been a tough one. It depends on what they're interested in. I'm always happy to give out my children's books to friends for their kids. Mm-hmm. But there hasn't been a particular book that I've said to people, you've got to read this, changed my life. That's been a little bit of a frustration too with the job. One that, I can't complain too much about, but I don't get to read too much because I'm already reading a lot for the research I do for my books. Yeah. So I have a stack of books that I want to read for pleasure that sit there waiting for me. So I get to read short things, but there are a lot that I would like to try, but it's always a time thing because I'm a dad too. So, in 2 hours, I have to go pick him up from camp and then take him to some other activity and stuff like that. Yeah. So it's, that's a big part of my life too.
Yeah, it's a very limited time.
Another part of the juggling. Yeah. The juggling just doesn't happen with career work. It's fatherhood, and I try to sneak in a little bit of a social life when I can,
Yeah. So how do you do the planning then? Exactly. Is it on the board, as you said, or how do you design your day, or do you plan 1 week in advance, or how does it work?
There's some things I can plan far in advance. Come on, not now. The cat's back. The tail was almost going in front of the camera. Some things like school visits and things can be booked far ahead, and I know I can plan for those. Some other jobs, I can plot out, I want to have the outline done by this date. Mm-hmm. I want to have the sketches done by this date and all that. And other things just happen that day or a few days in advance. I'll get an email about something that has to be addressed or something that gets sent back that I'm not expecting that needs to be revised. So you're always adapting, and you're always trying to keep room at least for things that just show up that morning in your email. Yeah. First hour or two is sometimes just doing all the administrative work and getting back to people and planning. But before that, I'm taking my son to drop him off at camp or getting him on the bus and stuff. Yeah. So it's all, there's some routine, and then which I like, there's some routine that's set, and then there's things that are fresh that keep your day interesting.
Yeah. And so when you think about the future, where you want to be in 5 to 10 years, what would be your dream scenario,
5-year plan. It would be nice I've always wanted to create a character or a series of characters that I could expand into a series, not just books, but, do the next Charlie Brown thing, where it becomes multimedia. And because I've done a lot of nonfiction, I've always had a hunger to do something. I've only done one fictional book, Jack the Tripper, which is all about the dangers of telling lies and things. And I've always wanted to, I'm envious of some of my friends who have created a character that allows them to just, start the day by saying, where can I take my imagination?
Mm-hmm.
What can this character do today? And have that freedom. So I've always looked forward to that day when I just, and of course I've got a few ideas on the board, but haven't had time to really flesh it out yet. So I guess to do something like that, a series like that.
That sounds good. I'm looking forward to see that.
Fingers crossed.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so the last question I would like to ask you is about like far, far future. And what would you like to be remembered for in 100 years?
That's hard. I don't know I don't think I'll be remembered in 100 years. How many people are? I guess, I don't know. It would be cool for my distant, great grandkids and things to just look through the family tree and say, oh, cool, look what our Uncle Gene did.
Yeah.
He was making books, and they go look and explore and see what I did. I guess, I hope there's some longevity with my books that go on, at least for a while. Knock wood again, all but one have stayed in print so far, and so that's hopeful. I guess just, it sounds corny, but of course, I hope people tell stories about me being a good person and, have good stories about nice things I've done for people, family, and friends.
Yeah.
But nothing earth-shaking beyond that.
But it sounds great.
I don't think I'm going to invent, a new form of energy or, a cure to cancer or anything like that. So I'll just stick with my books and family memories, legacies.
Yeah, that's really great. So I really like that. And so thank you so much for being here. And maybe if you have last piece of advice for young artists, what would it be before we say goodbye?
Advice for artists. Some I mentioned where it's just don't limit yourself out in the art world. Stay connected. Go out to lots of events. My career, like I said, it started because I went out to some author illustrator events and met friends who are still friends who mentored me along and made me realize, there's a career here to explore. That scbwi.org is a great organization in which to belong. There's a book that everybody can look into. This probably just applies, I don't know if it's international or not, but there's the Children's Writers and Illustrators Market, which is a book that comes out every year, which tells you all the publishers, what they publish, what they look for submissions and all of that. That's a good thing. But, try to work every day, keep your imagination fresh and your skills fresh. I think that's it. Stay optimistic. Develop a tough skin. Be prepared for rejection because you're going to get a lot of it. Even when you're established, you're going to get it. And don't take it personally. Just remember, there's a lot of people out there as talented as you, more talented than you, less talented. A lot of times it's just who sees your stuff that day and does it work for a project I'm doing. It can be that subjective with editors and art directors. Yeah. So stay optimistic, and keep going with it.
Yeah, that's perfect way to end the interview. I really love it. And thank you so much for being here and for everyone joining.
Thank you, everybody, for listening or staying with this for so long. I hope I wasn't boring.
No. I'm really grateful that you took a time from your busy schedule. And thanks again.
Thank you. And it was a pleasure.
Hey guys, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and let me know in comments. Also, please subscribe to my channel for more videos because I post new interview every single workday. You can also find the resources mentioned in this episode at artsideoflife.com. Just type a guest name in the search bar. There is also a little freebie waiting for you, so go check it out. If you want to listen to the interviews on the go, make sure to check out the podcast episodes at artsideoflife.com/podcast. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you, and don't forget to inspire each other. I will see you guys in the next episode.